Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sabrina Oda. I am facilitating conversations and interviews for Many Cultures, One Community. I'm very excited to do this work, and I'm very excited for our next interview. So without further ado, I will let him introduce himself.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you guys for having me here. My name is Ali Alameedi. I'm 23, a recent graduate from the University of Washington. I got my degree in public health. And I really, since early in college, I've been very involved in the community. I initially got involved in the community when I was at the end of my freshman year when I joined the MSA. So I joined the Muslim Student Association, ever since the end of my freshman year, I've just been part of it. Eventually got into the leadership position, became president, and just kind of swept my way into community work through that. And one of the biggest roles that I've taken, I've been in many of the organizations throughout Seattle just helping out, but one of the things I've done particularly is youth work. I've worked with a lot of youth, blessed to be part of the community work, the efforts, and just seeing the different parts of our Muslim community abroad and greater Seattle area, and trying my best to address the difficulties and the struggles of the various youth that are here. So yeah, it's also particularly focusing not just on religious studies, not just the spiritual aspect of it, but on the emotional aspect of it.
You see youth are experiencing, and you could change it, what would that be?
This is a very difficult question. I appreciate it. And I think it does. One of the aspects of it is toxic masculinity, in the sense of I would really want to change the narrative about manhood, the narrative about Iman. What is Iman? And in the sense of, if we struggle, that means we have low Iman. This is the common phrase, quote we hear from in our communities is, if you're depressed, it means you're not praying enough. If you're struggling, or if you have a lot of fear, or you're sad, that means you're not a man enough. If you're feeling sad about, whatever it is, our narrative is destructive, absolutely destructive to any sense of self-worth, any sense of self-value, any chance for our youth to grow up in a healthy and empowering environment where they actually become healthy adults. Because I believe in their growing up, we teach, if you just do enough religiously, if you just pray enough, all these human factors that are completely normal will go away. When in reality, this never will go away. It's just human nature. We will always be sad. We will always experience our emotions. The Prophet ﷺ was not a person of, he was not just a person of happiness. He cried. Rasulullah cried. He grieved. He had the year of grief, the year of sadness when his wife died and when his uncle died. Yet it seems like we have this fixation on almost a suppression of emotion, when actually emotion is very beautiful. Even anger is a very healthy emotion if displayed in the proper way. Anger teaches us to take action. Something has been violated. A personal boundary has been violated, or something's going on and it needs to be corrected, or something needs to be looked at. And so changing the narrative, and it's not even just manhood, but even a broader sense of what is emotional well-being in the Muslim community. Islam is religiosity. The physical component is one component of our well-being. We pray, we read Quran. These are one aspects that improve our lives and our well-being. But we also crave connection, ability to process our emotions, our experiences in our life, self-care, whatever it is. All these components feed into our existence and our spiritual state. And so really changing our understanding of what it means to be spiritually fit in our community. So I don't know if hopefully that made sense, but that's kind of what I would want to begin to at least address or change if I could.
That the question of what are you most afraid of, and have there been any points in your life that have been either sad and you've turned them into something very happy, or that you like maybe those two questions are a little intertwined in some way. Is there something that you have seen that has been very sad that you have been able to turn around? And is there something that you're afraid of that could be coming soon, or could be coming in the future for some of our youth, or for people that you know in life that you're hoping could change?
Great question. In terms of the fear for the youth, one of the things I'm really scared of, just I just feel really sad for the youth because I don't want them to grow up in an environment or where they feel like they have to prove their value or their worth. I feel like this is a common narrative, at least that I've grown up with. And I came from a pre-med background. My worth was based on how well I could succeed in school. And if I scored poorly, I felt terrible about myself. And if I couldn't perform, I felt like I was worthless as an individual. And when I performed well, it was the opposite. I felt like, oh, I'm actually worth something. And that changing sense of value is it's very horrible. It's very destructive to any sense of self-esteem that one can have. And one of the things I just don't want to happen is for youth in the future to look at their situation and be like, oh, I don't score high, or oh, I'm not a hafid, or oh, I'm not this, I'm not this. And to believe that and to superimpose the belief of others onto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to say, oh, if people think I'm not worth it, if people think I'm not good enough as I am, if people see my circumstances and say, oh, you don't work hard enough, then that is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at me. And therefore they superimpose that understanding or that belief onto Islam and get distanced away from it based on a false narrative of what it actually means to have value. Because in reality, our value stays the same, no matter what our income is, no matter what car we drive, no matter what happens. Our value as inherent human beings always stays the same, no matter what. It's our self-esteem that changes based on certain things, right? It's how we view ourselves, but our value never changes. Yet we're taught that our value changes based on our circumstances. And my generation grew up with this. At least I grew up with this, where my value changed depending on how well I performed and on outside expectations. So my fear is if we don't intervene, we set up the youth to believe that their worth and their value is based on something that's superficial, that comes and goes. Yet, and also superimpose that onto Islam and say, oh, Allah hates me. Allah doesn't love me. Allah thinks I'm bad. Allah thinks I'm not trying hard enough. When in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't care how much money you make. Allah doesn't care what kind of car you drive. And it's a really big issue that I'm really scared for, because I've seen it. I've seen it in our communities where we drive kids away. We drive the youth away because we want them to do specific things. We care. I don't think our immigrant families don't care. I think they care a lot. And they want the best for us. And I think sometimes it can come off very constrictive. It can do the opposite of what we intended to do if we're not careful, because it's, there's no being on either extremes of not caring at all to caring so much that you strangle somebody are not, those are not either extreme is not good. Coming to a center where we can accept our kids as they are, regardless of what they do, in this, and this is not to say that sin is okay. I'm not saying that drinking alcohol or drugs or whatever is okay. But what I will say is if a youth is engaging in these activities, don't say that they are bad people. Don't say that their value has changed, because their value has not changed whatsoever. And that's one of my mottos is I don't care if a youth comes in and says, oh, I have a girlfriend, or I'm smoking, or I'm drinking, or I'm struggling with all these things. And even if they don't care that they're doing it, my job is not to tell them what's halal and haram, because as a society, we've done a really good job of doing that. My job is to be there for them and to care about them. And I hope, my fear is that we won't have that sense of caring and appreciation and acceptance of people. We can remove the sin away. We say, oh, I don't accept the sin, but I accept the sinner. That's the difference. That's the difference. Rather than clumping them together and saying, this person commits sin, therefore they are bad. Because that narrative perpetuates what? Kulli bani Adam khata'un. Every son of Adam makes mistakes. Every son of Adam sins. Nobody is free of sin. Really nobody. And so to say that is to say that our inherent nature is flawed and terrible, and that we're bad people innately. So, and I don't believe that. So anyway, hopefully I went on a tangent, but
if you had maybe a vision or of what maybe our local community or maybe the world, we're in a very interesting time right now with COVID and everything that's happening politically and everywhere else, really, the whole world, I feel like. If you could envision the next 5 years or the next 10 years, and if you had advice for people to make it go into the direction that you envision, make the world go into the direction you envision, what would be some advice, or where would you like to see the world, or our community even in the next 5-10 years?
that's a big question. You're throwing hard ones at me. Thank you. Um, I think that one of the things I've seen in our communities is we have our walls up.
Mm.
We have huge walls up, and it prevents us when we have walls up. When I have my walls up, it prevents me from being vulnerable, from connecting with people, from being in an intimate relationship with people around me. Um, I can't do that if my walls are up. I don't let anything in, and nothing is let out, and that comes from a past of pain, of undealt with trauma, of struggling with things like that, right? Where I feel like I can't trust those around me. And one of the biggest things I really want to see in our community is creating places where we can begin to deconstruct our walls and begin to heal our trauma as a community, both religious shame trauma that we've had, because it's not, our religious community is not perfect. Our religious community has struggled with a lot of things. We might, with religious shaming, we have people that religious shame people all the time. Oh, brother, you didn't fast? Oh, wow, like you must be a really bad Muslim. Or brother, you don't pray 5 times a day? Yeah, you're probably not a Muslim anymore. I've heard things like this, right? These are not uncommon statements. Yet, and I dissociate. I'm not even talking about whether it's haram or halal. That's not the discussion. I'm not even going further. We have imams and scholars and things like that do this stuff. But we like we talked about earlier, we don't separate the sin and the sinner, and so there's a lot of shame, a lot of trauma that's resulted not just from childhood or immigrant status, but even in growing up in our Islamic schools, in our communities. People I've heard many stories of people they come to the masjid and they say, I am never it would be very naive to overlook the fact and say, oh, we're Muslim, therefore Islam is perfect, therefore we are also perfect. Astaghfirullah, no one can claim perfection. And it doesn't mean we're bad people. It means we have a lot of work to do as a community. So I would really like to see initiatives from people like yourself and other people who are really in the field and working intensely in mental health specifically, begin to address how to deal and heal from trauma, how people can begin what's it called? Self-help, self
Self-care.
self-care, self-healing, and all these. Thank you, and all these respects, because we as a community really lack in self-care and connectedness as a community. We have this tough it out mentality, Mamba status. We talk about we talk about this a lot, but this is this can really result in toxicity, because we're taught, do it yourself. Oh, if you believe in Allah, Allah will take care of everything. It's true. This is a very beautiful thing, but we take it to an extreme and we say, oh, I never need to ask for help. I never need people. I can do it all alone. And if I just sit in my room all day, Allah will take care of it. This is not how it works. We tie our camel. We take the necessary means. We reach out to people. We ask for support. We ask for help. And we take the resources. And at the same time, we say, Ya Allah, I've done my part. Now, please help me heal. Help me get through this. Help me become an upstanding citizen. And it begins with our institutions. We have many institutions in the Greater Seattle area that I would like to see begin initiatives like this, like trauma healing workshops, um, addiction therapy, whatever. All these things. We have people who are drowning in our communities in silence. Convert brothers and sisters don't have any resources of connectedness, much abandoned, whatever it might be. So beginning to create a collective effort. And we have, subhanAllah, I looked up in the directory. We have one Muslim therapist registered in Washington State that I know of. And Sister Humadeen is legend. She's always at all the events and she rocks it, May Allah bless her the best. But we need more. We need more people who are actually on the ground and doing those initiatives and who are very appreciative of those who understand the cycle. So working on both those aspects. Hopefully that would make sense.
Kids. So I guess that was a segue into me asking you if there's anybody that's super influential in your life. Who would it be and why?
If I was being honest, and this is gonna sound cliche, and I will say I will say it, but I will say it, is the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is really powerful representation of all these characteristics that we talked about. He was really honestly a man of kindness, generosity, gentleness. In all his hadith, you see how he navigates his emotional landscape, and gives us permission by teaching, by doing it himself. He shows us what the right things to do are, right? And he navigates all his emotions. He experienced anger, frustration, sadness. He's also experienced when Surah Al-Duha was revealed, it was at a time of complete sadness. He believed. He was in despair. He believed that. What did he believe? He believed that the Prophet ﷺ believed that Allah had abandoned him. He thought, oh, I haven't received that revelation in a while. Like, what's going on? And Allah consoles him and says, no, I have not abandoned you, O Muhammad. I took care of you when you were an orphan, and I'm going to take care of you now. Powerful. And the Prophet ﷺ teaches us just that all the range of emotions are accepted. All range of emotions are beautiful. And to how he engaged with people was on a level of gentleness and kindness that are like just extremely profound. And for some reason, I don't know why, and I think it comes from our background. We grew up with certain things, and it gives us a lens, and so we only see life through those lenses. But rarely do I hear people talk about the emotional intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ, or teaching us the lessons of emotional intelligence from the life of the Prophet ﷺ. How do we internalize emotional intelligence? What does that look for us? We talk about religious intelligence. We talk about our religious acts, but the Prophet ﷺ was much more complex and much more dynamic than that, right? And
how can we as a community fix a lot of the problems that we identify without taking that extra step to ask people? So I think that those really stood out to me from what you were saying.
Thank you so much for bringing all that stuff up. One thing that I feel like was a theme amongst what you're saying, and I think it's the tool to changing our communities. Wallahi, I really believe it to be vulnerability. I struggle. As a man, I grew up with a narrative, don't be vulnerable. Vulnerability is weakness. Wallahi, one of the things I've learned in my journey, and I've done a lot of self-work and self-help work, or working on myself in the last year particularly, was learning that vulnerability takes so much courage and is a sign of bravery. And wallahi, vulnerability nurtures intimacy. And I cannot have intimacy, connection with people without being able to be vulnerable. Saying I made a mistake and being willing to own up to that mistake. Being willing to say, I need help. Being able to say, I felt hurt when you said something. Being able to navigate this emotional landscape, whatever it is. If a masjid board can come and say whatever, I'm not nobody particular, but if a masjid board can come and say we made a mistake and we apologize and we're sorry and we'd like to work on this, that's a powerful thing. That's healing. That's a beginning. But I cannot expect people. I can never expect people to come to spaces and be willing to open themselves up if I'm not willing to open myself up. If I'm not willing to be vulnerable, if I'm advocating and I'm saying, I'm going to come and I want to make a difference and I want to open a safe space for everybody. and I don't allow I don't come and I don't show up vulnerably, I can never expect the people that are struggling the most, that are the most vulnerable populations, that are the most traumatized populations, to come forward and say, "Oh yeah, I've done this." If I have my walls up, it will never come. Healing will never come if my walls are up with people that I'm working with or whoever. And that's how I work with my youth. My youth. I try to put my walls down. I try my best to. I try to act like, I'm just kicking it with them. I'm not trying to teach them anything. I'm not trying to be their mentor. I'm just there with them. I'm experiencing with them. I'm not perfect. I don't know. Sometimes they know more than I do about some stuff. They memorize sometimes more Quran than I've memorized. Does that make me a bad person? No, it doesn't make me a bad person at all. And it doesn't make them a bad person for not knowing as much or whatever, for struggling. But if I can show up vulnerably, other people are given the permission to do the same thing. I give people the gift of seeing me when I can show up vulnerably, and that's one of the biggest things we struggle with in our community, and I struggle with as a man, and in our greater manhood. I focus on manhood because it's not in. That's where I see the biggest difficulty. I can check myself as a man. I struggle with vulnerability, and I think as the greater community, we struggle with vulnerability as men, and it destroys our relationships, or we can't create any relationship. I cannot create relationships if I have my walls up, and so I think that's a lot of what you touched on. And how can I show up for the converts? How can I show up for my Black brothers and sisters in Islam, or even in humanity, if I don't put down my walls and say, yeah, I've had times where I've shown up in ways I would have never wanted to show up, that I'm ashamed of. I've said things about things I would never want to say. I've turned a blind eye to things that have happened. But subhanAllah, that's the beauty. We're not supposed to be perfect. Allah didn't. It's not in our design. So, but why do we feel like it's hard to put our boundaries down, our walls down? Excuse me, because we fear not being perfect. I fear people looking at me and like, oh, that guy is not perfect. That guy. Oh, that guy. You hear what he said about that person? Blah blah blah. Whatever. But in reality, if somebody shows up authentically and says, yeah, man, I'm so sorry that I said that. I said that. That's a bad word. I should not have said that to you. That's totally derogatory. I'll try and show up better next time. It's really something I struggle with. That's how healing happens. That's powerful. That's how growth happens, right? And that's something we're really missing, especially in youth groups, in masajid environments, whatever. It doesn't even matter. Even outside the Muslim identity organizations, we're talking even in general relationships and organizations as a whole. We lack love and vulnerability, right?
I just want to end with maybe if you wanted to share a quote that you believe either represents you as an individual or represents, where you're at in life, where our community is, where the world is, whatever you'd like to share, I would appreciate it.
Okay, cool. This is so I'm a little bit of a nerd, so this will go out to my nerds. But if you've ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender,
I have not, but yeah.
great show. It's on Netflix. One of my favorite characters is named Uncle Iroh, and he says something very powerful, and I think it's profound for me. I've definitely shed a tear about it because it's just so relevant to my life, and I think in our life in general. But he says, you can't always see the light at the end of the tunnel, but if you keep moving, you will come to a better place. So it's very, very powerful, profound quote. And I found sometimes I'm like looking around, I'm like, man, things look like they're not, I'm done, like things are just gonna, I think it's over for me, I don't see a way out of this. But if I keep moving, if I keep doing the work, if I keep showing up the way I want to show up, I'll get to where I need to get to. I will come to a better place. It's just a matter of time. So.
Wow, that again is very powerful, very profound. I really appreciate that. It has been an honor speaking with you today. You have shared so much. You've really inspired me. I have been fired up yet again to work with youth. So thank you so much for that. It's very refreshing. I haven't had this kind of conversation in a very long time. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for taking the time to talk to us and to share your story and to share the work that you're doing with us.
Absolutely. More than happy to. And thank you so much for having me and for being a great host.
Awesome. Okay, I am going to stop the recording